Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, and next to her is Moses Abelian, the Undersecretary General for General Assembly and Conference Affairs. The Deputy Secretary General will have some opening remarks, and then they will take your questions. DSG, please.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and a big thank you for the coverage that we got last week. And I have to say, across the whole spectrum of it, the message that everyone seemed to me to be getting was that we had created a certain momentum for things that were important, in spite of all the other issues that plague us every day, and that we continue to try to address. But I think we achieved what we wanted, which was to say to everyone the SDG agenda needs to be rescued, and these are the things we need to do about it, and this is how. We got, of course, world leaders and many partners, over 500 partners that came into the UN to mark the halfway point. They joined us not just for the SDG Summit, but also the Action Weekend, where we try to bring stakeholders in across the spectrum, from women to civil society, business, science, all came through the doors. We had the Climate Ambition Summit and other major meetings that happened on health, the three there, and financing. Many other side meetings on the political side of the House, which, as you know, always is important to the SDG agenda because it's the context in which we work. And we're conscious of those conflicts that we have to save not just livelihoods, but very more importantly, the lives. We went in sober. We tried to ensure that we brought solutions to the gaps that were very clear from our report, and to create greater momentum and commitment, and to see if we could bring those synergies together with the many stakeholders that came through. We centered a lot of this around 6 transitions, in addition to gender equality and the means of implementation. Essentially, our barriers to getting to the SDGs have been the means of implementation: finance, technology, trade, but those 6 transitions for us were important as they looked at energy and food systems, the digital piece, but also the climate, the triple climate crisis that we have. What have we achieved? Well, first, I think it was right up until the last moment, a high-level commitment from member states in the political declaration for the SDGs. It was very clear there that they supported one of the initiatives that the SG has put down to look at financing on the SDG stimulus, but it was also reaffirmation of the goals and their relevance as a framing for us to get sustainable development and meet the 2030 agenda. We have also in this ignited fresh momentum and mobilization around the SDGs with the partnerships in business, but also we saw a lot of that coming from our women's organizations and youth. Youth were taking center stage in many areas, particularly as it related to the digital. In the Action Weekend, we started on the Saturday. We had over 5,700 attendees. That came through different high-impact initiatives, but also constituent issues. So when women gathered, they spoke to the issues that mattered most to them, youth as well. Business brought in some of the issues that they were working on, and clearly where we needed to accelerate in terms of the business partnerships across the world. We saw impressive increase in the involvement of the SDG Summit. We had 165 speakers, and this is compared to the 100 that we had in 2019, so before COVID. And a couple of years after COVID, the interest certainly was increasing around implementation. We heard statements from 144 participating states this year, as opposed to the 80 that we had in 2019. We had 57 heads of state and vice presidents that were also with us, as opposed to 38 in 2019. So we did see an increase in leaders coming to speak on the SDGs. We had a social media engagement, which is the way of communication these days. Over 4 million Twitter views related to the SDG Summit, the Action Weekend, and the SDG Pavilion. The Pavilion also had online interactions, which were very impressive. I attended a couple myself, and the level of interaction with young people particularly was impressive. There was a lot of intergenerational engagement, particularly with women. We had Women Rise, over 80 women from different leadership positions who spoke, and I think we opened with a very interesting conversation, I would say a fireside chat, that spoke to some of the challenges but the opportunities of women in leadership, and that was with Melinda Gates and former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, a young person doing the interviewing, who has, perhaps if you look at Lily Singh is her name, look at her Instagram account, she's the person that communicates for me the best the SDGs. And I'd spoken to some of you earlier by saying, how do we communicate what is very complex? She seems to have broken it down and is helping us very much to pass that message as we try to increase our stakeholder audience. And so really the beacon of hope that the pavilion provided, the media zone that we got. As we came back at the end, if what are we harvesting, recommitment and acceleration, halfway mark, 7 years to go, there is a determination, and there were many people who talked about what they would do when they get back. This included heads of state and government who had some announcements to make, some on energy, some on the green transitions where critical minerals in DRC. We also had from Ghana commitments made by the president in fora that we convened for everyone to speak about. We do have a political declaration that we will take forward. This is important because as we spoke to the political declaration, the finance piece was the biggest. You will see there is a thread there to the meetings on the Summit of the Future and the financial architecture. Here we have the SDG stimulus coming to the financial architecture. How do we bring that together? Where's the next bus stop? Marrakesh, the World Bank and IMF meetings, and we will be very clear there on how we can take the next steps on the rechanneling of an additional 100 billion in SDRs. It needs about 5 or 6 countries. Then we think that we can make that happen for the MDBs, putting that through the World Bank. The African Development Bank could leverage about 600 billion SDRs. That's a huge amount for us to continue with the scaling up of the investments for the SDGs. But we will also lay that foundation, which I think is fairly clear. This meeting showed many people engaged with the issue of governance around the international financial architecture. It is difficult, but it's on the agenda now, and that reform we will follow through all the way to the Summit of the Future. So definitely a to-do list there. We don't stop on the commitments that we have to have in place for the climate agenda. This, the Climate Ambition Summit was incredibly successful for us. We set out to really look at the integrity of those that were going to be the first movers coming through the door. And I think that we got that. There were a large number of people who put commitments on the table. But what it also showed is those that should do the most, who've had the most to do with where we are situated on the climate agenda, weren't able to come through the door. And I think that gave us integrity, is that those that have the least to do with it put their best foot forward. They continue to do so in spite of the challenges. And we hope that this will raise the pressure and the momentum for COP28 to meet the global stocktake and its ambitions. For one, the Loss and Damage Fund, in making sure that we are well over the 10 billion for the Green Climate Fund that has new leadership there. The Global Accelerator for Jobs and Social Protection, this is one that matters to everyone, no matter what the investment, what are we taking from that, and especially for women. Maybe a little background, the contributions on the Green Climate Fund. We did see the second replenishment announced, and as I said, we're trying to get past that 10 billion. We are, I think, right now about short 3 billion, and we're hoping without the announcement, we haven't had the announcement from big countries who have stepped up before, so we hope we will get over that. So in conclusion, I would just say that for the SDG part of this, it was a summit of hope. I think that we have still managed to give that to the many out there and to message that. We've got 7 years to get the SDGs. We did say all the way through this that, this is done in the second half. Many quoted that, and many have come back to us to say next steps, and many, of course, are already continuing with that as they go back. Just perhaps a little mention on the high-level meetings on health, 3 critical meetings for universal health coverage, for the pandemic preparedness and tuberculosis, all well attended, political declarations through, I think that was signaled from the SDGs. We have been very concerned that health more or less fell off the agenda. I think that it is starting to come back on again. We now need to see the resources get behind that. For instance, the big push to end TB, which can be done, and the very critical steps that were spoken about there, including the vaccine and the investments for the vaccine. We had one initiative that was well worth us speaking about. It was launched last year between the AU and the UN, and that was the Global African Business Initiative. It was about Unstoppable Africa, a new global narrative. It was oversubscribed. We had over 1,000 attendees at the event. It was 2 days. Major outcomes, I think I mentioned that just a little earlier, Ghana's energy vision. And there they launched their investment plan. It is a $550 billion energy transition. It intends to create 400,000 jobs by 2060. We also had, as I said, the DRC, which was, again, scaling up, positioning its country for the batteries and the electric vehicle value chains. So here, the president and the minister launching the special economic zone status for that. The African Development Bank also announced a transformative partnership with Google, establishing a center of excellence for coding in Africa. So many things that we managed to achieve, and it's given us a lot of homework for the UN system. We are clear that, what we take back to our UN country teams and to continue to convene with governments, with stakeholders, to carry it forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll go to Sherwin Bryce Pease, South African Broadcasting. No.
He will once
He will answer a question if you have one.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you for briefing us post-UNGA. I wonder, DSG, what the low-hanging fruit are. You talked about development, you touched on some geopolitics. Is it the Sudan file? Is it the coups in West Africa? Is it the war in Ukraine? Or in terms of development, is it financing for development? What can be done in the short term to put this agenda into play?
I think there are several things. First, in the fragile context that you speak to, for instance, the war in Sudan and the impact that it's had on Chad. For us, the meeting that we had on Chad here was about the transition, but it was also about the development agenda. So we brought both back the stability and getting through a transition. We got more resources because we were able to speak very directly to the humanitarian issues that are there. But beyond that, there was the development agenda. And that, of course, has been put on hold for many reasons tied to the transition. We managed with some of the multilateral institutions there to unblock some of those so that we can see more resources going into some of the areas where there's some stability. Remember, in the Lake Chad, there are still pockets of Boko Haram. So that's a low-hanging fruit for us. That started a few weeks ago, but it went into this meeting, and we were able to carry that forward in the meeting that was had with Chad. If there are others, we are very concerned about what we have to do with Niger. Niger is taking its course with hopefully mediation that can bring us back to democratic rule. But, the humanitarian corridor is absolutely essential right now. With, of course, the sanctions there, people will hurt without power, without food. And so that's something we saw at least many of our partners so that we could reiterate to them that, yes, there is a political process that is going on, but we also need to deal with that.
Thank you. Edie, then Pam.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Secretary General. You said that we will follow through. How specifically are you going to follow up? And what are you going to do with the countries that didn't make specific commitments on the SDGs? And a second question, only one of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council sent their leader, the United States President Joe Biden. What impact did the absence of the leaders of Russia, China, Britain, and France have on this year's high-level meetings? Thank you.
I'll start with the easy question. I think the response to only having one out of the 5 was disappointing, and certainly we might have had more commitments that would have been tangible had they been here on many of the SDG, but also the more general agenda that was discussed at the debate. However, having said that, 88 heads of state and government came, and there were commitments made. There was also conversations that were had that will carry some of this agenda forward. It is not always that we will get the answers to the problems we have here, but without that interaction and without those leaders speaking with each other, it makes it very difficult. There was a strong Africa voice. I mean, we saw that in the headlines that came back, that this was about partnerships. This was not about being left behind or demands made that where commitments were not met. And I think that we really saw that move. We saw many Nordic countries step up on gender issues and commitments made to gender-based violence, which is huge. We've seen a 200% to 300% increase, depending where you are in the world on that. And we also saw much more engagement from other multilateral institutions, the bank, the IMF, and African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, we're all here.
Pam?
Thank you, DSG, for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. We heard a lot this morning at the Security Council on Afghanistan and the dismal state of affairs. I can see from your face you agree. And of course, for the 3rd year in a row, Afghanistan didn't speak at the General Assembly. You were the last highest level UN official, as far as I know, to meet with them. Are there new meetings planned? What can be done in terms of trying to reverse this? Thanks.
Incredibly disappointed that we've gone from one pronouncement to another that just continues to make life, just when you think it's getting bad for women in Afghanistan, it gets worse. And I think that, here we have to continue to keep the voice and engagement loud. It was good to have that discussion at the Security Council today and to see Afghan women speak. We will continue to keep that voice alive. We'll wait for the report that comes to the Security Council. I think that that's going to be important in is there a different response that we can have to really push for not just the neighborhood, but of course the Taliban to act on some of these laws by reversing them and allowing women to take their rightful place in their communities and in the society. It's just unacceptable where it's at. I would, however, say that we still commend the international community for hanging in there, because it's one thing women in Afghanistan have said: don't forget us, let's keep saving the lives and the livelihoods, and this is important to continue to keep that struggle alive, and this is what we continue to do. Visits, meetings, I think that we will look at the visits that can be made in the near future. There is a Women in Islam conference that is coming up that will be taking on some of these issues. You will have known that the OIC had sent a mission recently to Afghanistan. So we think the neighborhood's important as well. Create that pressure and that momentum. They're part of the international community, and they've got to put pressure to make sure that women's rights are back where they should be in Afghanistan.
Thank you. Michelle, then Deji.
Thank you. Given that the last country has just finished speaking, I wanted to ask both of you who might have some fun figures, how many women spoke, who was the longest speaker, and particularly in relation to the number of female speakers, DSG, if you have any remarks on that, because I know it's not very high.
No, it's not very high, and we have a huge gap. There are a couple of, it was nice to hear that in a couple of elections coming up in Africa, we may get the first African, the first African woman president in that country. And so that was good news. I was on the podium for a while and happy to sit behind Prime Minister Mia Mottley, but goodness me, I cannot count the rest. But Moses, you have some fun figures that you shared with us this morning.
Yes, thank you, DSG. Good afternoon. Some figures. I think in 1 hour we just only complete the general debate. So whatever I'm going to say is theoretical, but it's verified. Okay. We had highest number of heads of states and governments together participating. I think that's important to keep in mind. So 88 heads of states and 42 heads of governments, if you put them together, and if you go before COVID, this number is higher. Yes, we didn't have all permanent members here, but this is just from that perspective. Second, what I would like to give you as a figure, we had 21 female addressing the general debate. 6 heads of states, 1 vice president, 4 heads of governments, 9 ministers, and 1 vice minister. Last year it was 22, so the difference is not big. On the longest speech this year, we had Burkina Faso, 38 minutes.
Burkina Faso.
Yeah. I mean, no, we had much longer. I mean, we had a few years ago Palestine 47 minutes. We had Macron 48 minutes. So we have seen longer. Shortest speech, for me, the most favorite always, it will be President Rwanda. He keeps the same 9-10 minutes and perfect. Everything is fits them. So that. As you may have noticed, we calculate every minute in order to manage 12-hour shift. We are the most interested for them to finish as early as possible. But anyway, we did make sure that we are more or less on time. So that worked. In terms of other figures, I think what I would suggest you to be, we had over 100 side events. Despite having all the parallel meetings, I didn't have any rooms to accommodate, but over 100 side events still took place in the building. And we had request over 2,000 bilateral meetings of member states. I mean, that 28 booths we have, that's what we were able to accommodate. That's the number of requests we received from member states. It's a pretty big number. I have been here a long time to say that it's a very big number. And in terms of the presence in the building, I don't know how this design of this building was done in the 1950s, that we are still able to manage such a big number in this building. We had around 13,000 delegates, the diplomats, registered. So the badges, etc. So that's 13,000. You add your colleagues' media, 2,500, 2,600. So that will bring you the number there. And then when I looked another number for special events, we had to bring people in, the DSG mentioned in her remarks. We had to issue 40,000 special passes, people to come in. So I don't know how many of you have noticed, but this is what we were, 40,000. This is what we were managing in the building throughout those 4 or 5 days. We had more heads of states and governments than participation in the general debate. That's also I have to emphasize, because we had heads of governments, Canada, Sweden, Norway, who were here, but they didn't address the General Assembly. President of Austria was here, he didn't address the General Assembly for him. So the number is even higher if I looked from that perspective. There are other some fun numbers, but I'm not there yet, so allow me to complete the general debate. You will see highlights later on through Stefan. Thank you.
Deji?
DSG, Xu Dezhi with China Central Television. Before the general debate, when answering a question about Taiwan and DSGs, you said, and I quote, "Every person matters, whether it's Taiwan or otherwise, and I think it's really important for member states to find a solution," end of quote. We know the long-standing position of the UN on the Taiwan question, but some media outlets, especially some Taiwanese media outlets, interpret or misinterpret your words as you, as Deputy Secretary General, support Taiwan to join the UN and UN system independently. Just want to ask you to clarify whether that's what you meant and what's your position on this question. Thank you.
That is a question that is already taken care of by the resolution. In answer to the question you had that time, you asked about people being left behind. And what I was telling you is that no one should be left behind. And in the case of Taiwan, there is a resolution to be had for that. And I continue to believe that we've said that in the resolution, that we leave no one behind. Who those no ones are is for us to determine and to address. And we're doing that across the globe, including in Taiwan.
But the position is still abide by the General Assembly
Yes,
resolution.
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. You. Yep.
Lucas Chapman with Arab News. Thank you so much for your time in this briefing today. Something that I noticed a lot of speakers mention in the general debate was artificial intelligence, the good, the bad, and the ugly of artificial intelligence. So with AI becoming more and more powerful, by the hour, by the day, is artificial intelligence a priority for the UN, and how might it tie in with the Sustainable Development Goals, either in terms of risk or reward?
I mean, the new era of technology is of great concern to us. It has massive potentials for the SDGs, whichever part of it you look at, whether it's health or it is industry, cities, education. But they have to have guardrails, and that's what we've introduced in our discussion for our common agenda, and it will be there in the Summit of the Future. It's one of those elements that member states have looked at in the scope that we discussed, and we had huge engagement with that. There were a number of side meetings, particularly some on the outside of the UN, but they did gather huge numbers of experts and stakeholders, everyone saying that really the place for us to be discussing those guardrails and protection of the potentials, I would say, is the UN, and I think that that was good news for us. It is the first time that we've had AI discussed in the UN. I think Moses tells me 14 speakers on that, have not had that before. And people are interested. People want to know more. There's a lot more knowledge being shared. Even in the discussions that we've had across issues with women's rights, the issue of AI has come in. And so I think there's full interaction. I'm really happy with this. It's one of the issues that we will take forward. Sorry, Edie, I didn't answer the first part of your question, which was what are we taking forward? We're taking energy transitions forward. We're taking the digital era and connectivity in countries forward. We are taking the food systems. That's, whether it is school feeding or it is value chains and supply chains that will enable us transform these systems to become much more resilient. We've seen the cost of living go up and food security be a big issue after the war in Ukraine. Lessons learned there. But we're also going to be looking at social protection programs, particularly the floor in governments, for them to consider a percentage of GDP to deal with that. The triple planetary crisis, it is important for us, climate, the nature-based solutions that we will need, and of course on pollution. We do have a COP to go to, and COP28 is going to be a massive lift for everyone. And I think that here, high expectations to keep the ambition, to make sure that it is credible, and to note how much more we will have to do to get to where we need to. As I said, the Climate Ambition Summit was very clear on the potentials. Countries were stepping up. Now we need the countries that really matter to move those figures on emissions, and the institutions that have to increase resources to promises made to the 100 billion, promises made to the Loss and Damage Fund, promises that are made also to adaptation.
Thank you. Gentleman in the blue.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Stephen Kujosaki, African Business Network Communications. Earlier on, you made mention that most of the countries have not committed to climate fund, and Africa and other developing countries have agitated for support because they are worst affected by these emissions. So how do we respond to their call as we speak? Thank you.
We continue to insist that those commitments made in Paris are met, and there are various opportunities that we've taken. The SDG Summit was one, the Climate Action Summit was another, and I think that we saw some commitments being made to the climate, the Green Climate Fund. It's important that we get the Loss and Damage Fund. I think it was a huge milestone that we got approval for it. It needs to be operationalized. The Africa Climate Summit was another place where these calls were made, and we hope that we can actually move more resources through the MDBs when we meet in Marrakesh in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Fethi, then Stefano.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary General. Ahmed Fathi, ATN News. I know the SDG is very close to you, since you were one of the people who got involved from day one. I remember the first time I met with you was in this particular room in 2015, 2016, when you were submitting the end results for it. For this year and from your vantage point, and I'm particularly aiming towards the goal number 2, zero hunger. With the proliferation of armed conflicts in many parts, and especially some parts where it have a significant input of food supplies, grain, fertilizers, etc. How do you see is this goal is close to be achieved or further to be achieved, since there were countries that you were out of the hunger zone? They are now moving quickly, if not already in this category.
We are off track on the hunger goal. There are more people going to bed hungry today than there were 5 years ago, and that's of great concern. But what we are seeing is a much bigger commitment in engaging with the specifics of where hunger is and what we need to do for food systems to deal with that. Since the war in Ukraine, a lot of that has been to do with production in countries, diversification of the food system itself, and grains, for instance. And that's important. It's important for nutrition. It's important for hunger. It's important that we see that as a way of preventing not just the results that we see with hunger on conflict, but on climate and on poverty, where an economy is not doing well, and not doing well in many cases because the impacts that have happened from COVID, from the war in Ukraine, the lack of opportunity of countries to access credit, debt has become a big issue. Debt is becoming more and more of a burden to many countries that they cannot even cope with paying the service bill in education or in health. And hunger is very much a part of where the challenges are for import bills for many countries. So it is, I am enthused that we have over 120 plans that have engaged with us to find ways out of this. We're short of the resources, but that's why we're pushing for the SDG stimulus. That is a low-hanging fruit. That is something we can do with existing resources and institutions. And I hope by the end of this year we'll have something to say about that, in at least getting 500 to 600 billion through multilateral development banks to our countries.
Thank you. Stefano?
Thank you, Madam. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York. I understand that the 17 goals have been on your radar. I mean, in this institution, and this ANGA 78 was dedicated to it. The United Nations, actually, the main goal in 1945 was to prevent another world war. And you just talked about how the United Nations is doing for these 17 goals. Someone is off track and so on. But after this week, do you think the United Nations, that for so many years have been able to prevent a Third World War, do you think that this organization is still capable to reach its main goal for one who was born in San Francisco, 45?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always believed that this institution convenes, first of all, to keep that hope alive. Otherwise, what is the point? What are you telling 8 billion people? There is still a responsibility of the P5 on the peace and security agenda to try to hold that and uphold the Charter, and they are struggling with it. That doesn't stop us trying to find the solutions. And if I want to tie that back to the framing that we have for the SDGs, we always recognize that the root cause of many of these conflicts that we have is a lack of application of our Goal 16, which is to strong institutions, the rule of law, and human rights. And I think we have to get back to ensuring that that's foundational. We're seeing unconstitutional changes in Africa, and in some cases welcomed. There is a problem with the social contract and with governance in those countries that will get these results. And we have to go back to those root causes to make sure that that social contract is adhered to. That's why you have these 3 pillars: no peace without development, no development without peace, and the respect for human rights. We don't just say those, but we have to implement them. And we've got the frameworks to do that. And yes, we're challenged. That's why we're here. That's why people want to talk. That's why we have the most number of people still coming to the UN. And they were not just coming for a picnic. There were many bilaterals, and to the point that Moses has made of the requests for them, and where they couldn't be accommodated in those 28 booths, I can assure you we had many other venues where bilaterals took place, and they took profit of the convening again that we have. So we don't have the luxury of giving up. That's why we're here, closing that gap between what is and what should be. And what should be has been on the table for a long time in many cases, but we just keep plugging away.
The gentleman with the beard, then Sherwin, then we'll close it off.
Chris Remington from NPR. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I wanted to talk about the Ukraine war, and in particular financial assistance for the Ukraine war. We're seeing in Washington right now a fierce debate in Congress about financial assistance that could lead to a federal shutdown. And I'm curious from the UN's perspective if the United States has to relegate or is changing the amount of financial assistance it provides, where the UN sees itself and how it moves forward in supporting Ukraine.
I think all financing that is challenged at different levels of government will have its implications for the development agenda, for the United Nations. But we continue to make the case that in spite of that all, this is not a place that you step back from, because it does have impact in many, many people's lives, and it keeps stability. And I think, the United States is interested in that. It's interested in giving its support to the humanitarians. It's interested in trying to stop conflicts and make peace. The UN plays a huge role in that. And it plays a huge role in preventing what could be far worse than what we see now. It's bad enough, and we're trying to stop it, but it could be worse without it. So I think we continue to make that case. We will visit, again, be visiting Washington to engage not just with government, but with the institutions that are there, our Bretton Woods institutions, and the many think tanks that are there, because I think this debate and this conversation, we need to socialize outside of these walls and the implications for it.
Thank you. Sherwin, last question.
So just to return to the lack of women representation during this UN General Assembly, you talked about 21 females addressing the General Assembly. That is a tiny percentage in comparison to the number of men. If you looked at the delegations in the General Assembly, some of them were all male. I wonder what it says about member states of this organization that have signed up to the 2015 Development Agenda. Goal 5 is catalytic across the 17 goals, and yet they arrive here with all men in their delegations. I wonder how that hits you, how that sits with you.
Terribly. They're not doing a good job, and we have no apologies to say it is wrong for you to present all male delegations in this day and age. Having said that, we've got to counterbalance that. That's what member states are doing, and we'll continue to push, whether it's in the parliaments to see more people elected, or it is when appointments come to see more women appointed to positions that they are capable of holding. But what we did here is to show the UN itself presents women at the table. I think men feel uncomfortable when they face the SG and he's got 3 or 4 women on his side, or I have, or that we go to a Women Rise and you see 85 women who are capable from all walks of life. By the way, there were government people there, there were private sector, there was us. So I think we have to keep showing that what they're doing is missing a huge number of competencies that would otherwise bring more solutions to the table if they were there. And we have to be courageous enough to say these things and to call people out delegation by delegation when you meet them, because it's clear and abundant in the hall when you're sitting at the podium and you're looking down. It's true, I'm searching for the women, and that has to get better.
It just,
Yes, I want to add something here. We spoke about heads of states and governments, but we had also 650 ministers in the building. It's a big number from the foreign minister, health minister, environment minister, anything. I haven't done the breakdown, but I believe, based on what I have seen, the numbers are going to get better, so you will not be as disappointed as heads of states and government level. So that's one thing. And second, in 2021, just a fun figure, 190 countries spoke about COVID-19. Last week, only 40 countries had spoken about COVID-19. Just.
in any cases?
I am not from medical office. I will not go there, but I can tell one thing, all our interpreters were here, they didn't get sick. That was the only thing I cared throughout the whole week.
All right, very quick question
No,
since we finished UNGA and on to the next. Is it time for a female SG?
It's always been time for a female SG, but let's hope we can make it happen this time. We are not short of women leaders in the world to take that position, and I would be very happy to be the chief champion behind the campaign team for that. So yes, absolutely. But let me say one thing about the ministers. There were finance ministers in this building. That's really important. This has not been a domain where the finance constituency think they should come and have a conversation on finance. And they were here, and there were many heads of state and government who wanted to speak at the financing for development meetings. So things are changing as the Secretary General is bringing issues of finance that everyone is concerned and engaged about to make that happen. So I take, with the ministers that came here that were sector specific, the finance ones for me were the big catch. And we hope that we can continue to convene in a way that they will come and they will make the difference that we need.
Thank you. On that note,
Thank you.
DSG and Moses, thank you so much.
Thank you.